has been really important, taking on those protocols in terms of a public health one, but adding that dimension, the dimension in terms of manaakitanga, in terms of Mātauranga Māori. And so I think those elements, we've seen it with the way that iwi chairs, for example, have collaborated in sometimes new and innovative ways. But for me in my work, one of the areas that really stands out is, particularly from what we would call in policy term, hard to reach communities, those that often characterised by lives of scarcity and deprivation, characterised by high levels of marginalisation, characterised by historical forms of racism, particularly within gang whānau and others. We've seen the way that they've collectively been able to mobilise, support each other, and not just support each other. Actually, it's a way that I see that they reach out to their broader community. So we've seen, in terms of some really difficult, in some communities which face significant day-to-day challenges, the way that members have really worked hard, incredible creativity, wonderful innovation. I think in thinking about things that, and in thinking about that and in thinking about our response for March 15, we saw a very similar element. We saw parts of the community that are often marginalised in terms of public participation, and again, thinking about gang-associated whānau and others, really seeking to be a part of that distinctive response, really seeking to make connections. And I guess that's a really important thing for us not to lose. It shouldn't be just in crisis that we can look at the ways that we can move together, that we can transcend some of the barriers and boundaries that are in our social lives. So we need to be thinking around that. One area that I've had quite a lot of contact with is, quite a lot of my work is sort of within prison environments and working with people who are incarcerated. And particularly, so there's some, there are some real issues there that I think that we need to be thinking about in regards to people in different forms of confinement. We've already seen that some of the issues in care facilities and others that we have to be mindful of. But I had a number of young people who'd been released prior to going to level 4. And I think that that's one of the things that really pushes about when you do reintegration, which I think we've got a lot more work to do, you really see the gaps that come up under those sorts of conditions. And so, and again, I've seen the innovation about the way people have tried to use technologies and others to be able to connect with each other, to stay safe, but also because it's their time of reintegration. So, there's definitely parts of our community that face significant challenges. And I've seen incredible innovation for people trying to transcend those sorts of challenges.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Level 4 was the point at which everyone in New Zealand declared we've got to stay home and only have access to essential services, which then raises the question, does everyone have a roof over their head? And does everyone have access to essential services? So it meant we applied this new test for ourselves. And actually, one of the things that I've been so heartened by is that it required everyone to be empowered to be able to help one another and support that community well-being. So I guess my question for both of you would be, I mean, community well-being, that sense of collectiveness, such a strong part of Te Ao Māori. How do we not lose that? And so you've both talked about some of the innovation. Is it a matter of us continuing to just empower and support communities to look after one another? Is there more to it?
So I think what's become really clear is that our own, well-being is intimately connected to those around us and also the natural environment. And this is a, Tracy was talking before about a distinctive response. That way of thinking and that way of being is distinctively Indigenous, actually, not just Māori, but Indigenous. So, we've done a bit of research looking at Indigenous models of well-being around the world, and there's kind of 4 core elements. There's some variation, but there's 4 core elements. And one of them is this desire to not only survive, but to thrive, whatever thrive means, So as Indigenous peoples, we've survived colonisation, we've survived previous pandemics, we've survived the introduction of diseases to which we had no immunity, we've survived, land confiscations and so forth. So we've survived, but we want to do more than survive. We want to thrive and flourish. And all the kind of various wonderful ways that we can The other core element is that distinctive identity, you know, the retention of what makes us distinctively Māori or Waikato or a New Zealander or a person of Aotearoa. What is it that makes us distinctive? Where do we belong? Where's our tūranga waiwai? For me, my tūranga waiwai is up the road. I literally live down the road for tūranga waiwai. But where's the tūranga waiwai for all New Zealanders? So that, you know, that distinctive identity and that belonging, that's a core part of Indigenous wellbeing. The other one is the idea of balance, of harmony, of equilibrium, of living in balance with nature, and also being able to sort of surrender control. We don't always have to be in control, but we do need to learn how to live in harmony. And the other one is this idea of autonomy and self-determination. Here in Aotearoa, we might call it tino rangatiratanga or mana motuhake. And, you know, there's a really strong link between mana and manaakitanga. So manaakitanga is not just about kindness, it's also about having the mana to be able to express, to give and receive manaakitanga. And, you know, and that is a core element of well-being as well. So these sort of dimensions of well-being, you know, they've served us as Indigenous peoples pretty well and as Māori. And those core elements, I think, can serve other New Zealanders really well. And so I think, you know, as we sort of embark on this recovery, we've come through level 4 amazingly, world leading, really. But this is a long game. And we know from the past that Māori and Pacific peoples have been disproportionately impacted by economic recessions and by pandemics. We know that the evidence is very clear. And there's nothing to suggest that that will be any sort of different moving forward, particularly with the economic recovery and some of the social challenges. And so, you know, moving forward, I think having the willingness and the bravery and the courage to reimagine, to reset, to think about what is that distinctive way forward. And we have so much here in Te Ao Māori to offer in terms of moving ahead. And it would be a missed opportunity not to use it.
What does thrive look like? This is a thing that actually came up on one of my other podcasts with Rachel Tolele. She used the exact same reference around how do we get beyond resilience to actually thriving, and how do we make sure that the impacts of this crisis, that it's different this time, particularly for Māori. What does thrive look like for both of you?
I mean, I think, you know, I mean, one of the things of the issue of well-being, as Tahu has talked about, it's been with us. We've talked about that for a very long time. We've given it a whole range of things. So, you know, if I think about what Mōri ora means, you know, what it means to be in this sort of real state of wellness and strength and what of thriveness. And in some cases, it also means we have to think about what is enough, you know, and so often in Indigenous circles now, there is a lot of talking about enoughness, you know, and that really speaks to the balance. And, you know, we often talk about, you know, that to do well, we must be well. And to be well, both the whenua and the wai and our waterways must also be well. And that really speaks to all of those types of dimensions. So I think that when we think about wealth creation, that wealth creation is the creation, it's about a shared creation around knowledge, around the transfer of that, and that intergenerational transfer of wealth. And I think that that's a transfer of wealth that is full, that is flourishing in terms of our knowledge and understanding of each other. I think it's an incredible space of thriving where there is that sense of a broader responsibility to each other, of those that we love and also of those that we don't know that well. And so in terms of, you know, those that are tangata whenua and those that are tangata tiriti, so the people of the treaty, all of those that have come into New Zealand because of the basis of the treaty. I think that's a really important element. And again, in crisis, we often get to know each other in these small types of ways, and it's around really building upon that. I think more broadly, you know, the concern around, we have groups, you know, that have had embedded inequalities. And so in terms of our recovery and in terms of the restoration, and again, really pulling on what Tahu says about what the restoration of mana looks like for individuals, what it looks like for communities, what it looks for the broader collective, what it looks like for the nation, about what it means to really stand in our mana, you know, internationally, globally, what will it mean? And I think that this is one of the single greatest opportunities that we have to ensure that the embedded disparities that exist within New Zealand are a part of that recovery and restoration. That when we go back to business as usual, it doesn't mean that we ensure that those that have been impacted over a relatively short period, yes, we must make sure that their recovery is significant, but this is the time to do really significant reform. I believe it's a space where we can show real global leadership. So I think particularly in areas like child poverty, really thinking around, I think as a nation, we've had to think about income adequacy in a very different way during the crisis. It's been a much broader conversation, and that conversation is really important for us to think about what those elements of our well-being mean as well. But a whānau-centred, child-centred approach, if I want to think about, I often talk about mokapunatanga, I have to have confidence that my grandchildren's grandchildren will live in a time of flourishing. What needs to be invested now to ensure that they're able to serve later?
One of the things that you mentioned in there, Tracy, was making sure that we're talking about these things, giving voice to these things, and so we won't end up doing anything differently if we don't have those contributions being made at every level. So I wonder if you could both tell me a little bit about the Science Advisor Network that you're part of. It's not something that people necessarily know about, but it's such an important part of, for me, for an important part of government. So tell us about the roles that you play and your perspective on that Science Advisor Network. Tahu.
Oh, so I just joined the Science Advisor Network forum last year, and it's been a really interesting experience. For me, I guess there's two great things that have come from it. One is the ability to sit around a table and have a sort of a shared commitment to knowledge contributing to well-being, whatever that looks like. And also to be able to kind of bring in very different perspectives and worldviews on what knowledge looks like, on who the holders of knowledge are, on who should be who can benefit from knowledge. And one of the sort of interesting things that I've been involved in the last year is really thinking deeply about, what is the role of mātauranga Māori here in the science system, and to think about science in a really inclusive way. I think too many of our tamariki are sort of presented with an image that science is done by people in white lab coats, often white men, who do experiments in their labs. And, that's only a very sort of small minority of what science constitutes. Science is everywhere. And our tupuna were scientists. Like, we might not have scientist dad or a scientist in our family, but look back far enough and we have scientists in our ancestry. Our ancestors who crossed the vast expanse of Te Moana Nui a Kiwa to get here, didn't get here by luck. They had to observe the stars, the winds, the currents. It was a phenomenal feat of science and courage to actually, to come here to Aotearoa. So we have science running through our whakapapa, but that message isn't necessarily one that's communicated or really sort of confirmed in meaningful ways for our tamariki in schools. And so even though the Science Advisor Forum is sort of, from looking from the outside, people might think it's sort of maybe an elite group of scientists who get together and talk about sciencey things. It's not, it's not. A lot of it is thinking about how can science and knowledge in all its diversity benefit our people, and what is the role that we might play in that. And so even though I've only been on that forum a short time, it's been incredibly useful to be able to be part of those conversations, and to also take that back to the communities and the networks that I'm involved in, and to also bring them into the room. So I don't really see myself as an expert at all. I'm not an expert. I might do sort of specialist research and population research, and I've been trained for that, but I don't see myself as an expert. I see myself as a conduit of knowledge flows that comes into the forum and that also disseminates outwards. And I'm happy to be a conduit.
I think people would be perhaps surprised to know that from everything from March 15th to Whakaari White Island to COVID, our Science Advisory Network has played a role, whether it was informing our mental health response and issues of social cohesion, right through to coordinating how we could get a search and rescue response in a safe way on Whakaari and COVID-19. Lots of obvious ways science, the research there is impacted, but it's so broad. And I've been so grateful for that advice. So Tracy, your thoughts on that network?
Well, I think, just picking up on what you just said there, it is really important in looking at the different responses globally for those that have followed ideological advice, so ideologues really, and those that have followed the broad variety of expert advice. And I think that we can see in our response just how effective that has been. And I've certainly been very impressed just how you've been all over the science. And talking to Juliette Gerard, she says, in the beginning, she says, you're going through it, she said, but, the Prime Minister is totally over the science. And, and I think that is this really important thing about what we're able to learn, the new lexicons that we all develop under different types of conditions, and this is one of those conditions. So like Tahu, I've actually been on the forum for a relatively short period of time since I took up my role as Chief Science Advisor for Ministry of Social Development. And I think one of the things there is, it is around the breadth of knowledge. It's around very, very outcome focused. I think it is really important that we recognize that I think more expertise, more needs to be pulled in. And for me, it really makes us want to always sort of rethink, problematize who are the experts. And some may have that in disciplinary. We certainly know there's so many that have it through lived experience. And that's a really important element to really think about that, about who are the sort of the knowledge champions. What does knowledge transfer look like? Who will be able to communicate? So Tahu's a very strong communicator. And I think, and that's why that's, one of her strengths across not just her disciplinary knowledge, but her strength across a whole range of domains. And it is one of the things that I think that Māori are particularly well attuned for is transdisciplinary type research. It's been, it's been a part of what we do is that we bring different types of skill sets and knowledge and share those. If we think about something like, Ngā Pai o Te Maramatanga, New Zealand's, Māori Centre of Research Excellence, that is this incredible conduit of transdisciplinary ways of thinking that sit within Te Ao Māori. But the actual forum is, there's the space for contestation, and I think that's a really important element for people to realise that knowledge and science is a contested space, that we have to keep working on it. So that contested element, the nature of the debate, the type of curiosity that comes out of just listening to people from very, very strong knowledge sets talk about those sorts of elements. And, I've really enjoyed, which is a sort of, again, one of those opportunities that comes out of over crisis, and working with people that I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity or chance to work with without this. And it really shows again at our level of work in terms of whatever the nature of the research is, whether it's social science, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, we are much stronger when you bring at the interface of knowledge production, that when you bring different people with different knowledge sets, that's when you generate new knowledge. And so that's a very exciting space to be.
And one of the things I've really appreciated about the network is that, as you say, Tracy, it's all about data, research, evidence, and a willingness to have your view changed based on what it is that you find, which obviously in politics is something that we need to be able to do. Tahu, has there been anything from the data or research or through this period that has surprised you, that's spoken to that fact that we do need to sometimes change our mind based on what we see?
Yeah, so I think most of the data that's been sort of generated in the last 4 weeks has really been around very sort of tightly focused on the infection and on sort of the modelling of infection fatality rates and spread and what fatality might look like under different kinds of conditions and scenarios. And, that's been really useful and necessary. And I think, people now know a lot more about epidemiology than they ever wanted to know before. And who knows, there might be a whole sort of cohort of science of high school students who want to be epidemiologists. You never know.
Yes.
So most of the data has really been around that. But I think, and it's sort of early days, but I think moving forward as we move into the recovery and we start to look more at the sort of economic and social data and how that can be sort of best calibrated, I guess, to sort of inform and support particularly those community-driven responses. So what I'm hearing from the networks that I'm connected to, and particularly from iwi and hapu and Māori organisations, is that they've been able to respond rapidly, but not necessarily with all the information that they need at the right time. And that moving ahead, if they want to keep sort of exercising that leadership, they actually need the right data at the right time that's going to inform that leadership. And so, for me, I deal with data all the time. I've been dealing with census data sets for a long time and also survey data. But one of the real opportunities, particularly in the Indigenous and Māori data sovereignty movement, is to rethink the ways in which we sort of design our data ecosystems so that Māori are right involved at the design space. Because if you have people involved and the communities involved in the design space, then you actually get the systems working in the way that you need them to and reaching the people that you're trying to reach. And so it just kind of makes good sense that you sort of, if you're going to do a redesign, that you have different knowledges at the table when you're doing that redesign. And there is a huge appetite, having done hapu and iwi demography, for at least 10 years, mainly using government data sets, but increasingly they want, hapu and iwi want their own data sets. There is actually a really big opportunity to redesign the data ecosystem so that data flows both ways. It's granular, it's relevant, and it's much more tailored to the sort of information needs on the ground. So for me, I think that's the big opportunity moving forward, is to connect that data to those who will be doing the action, delivering the policies, being on the ground, exercising the leadership so it actually works, not just for government, but actually for communities as well.
And that makes complete sense to me, because I know every decision we've made, we've wanted to understand what evidence sits behind this decision, what data do we have around how that's working already. It makes sense to me that at a community level, they'd want exactly the same.
Yes.
Tracy, anything that surprised you or that you've grabbed and thought this is actually something that we can really improve going forward as well?
Well, we certainly know that the social and economic impacts are going to extend far beyond the health impacts for a long period of time. So given that a lot of my work is particularly looking at inequalities, addressing those issues, it's not that there's new things, but it's about really recognizing the different forms of knowledge coming from other places can make a contribution for that. We know we have to really think about the local decision making. We need to be ensuring that at all those sets that it's a really informed, that's culturally informed, that it's adaptive, that it's flexible. And I think that that level of flexibility, the types of agility that we're seeing, the amounts of imagination, particularly even with our rangatahi. So those that are having to stay, home from school, those that are having to stay home from university, we've seen some really strong rangatahi-led movements about the way that they've taken ownership of their own learning. And one of the things when I was talking to Stuart McNaughton, who's the Chief Science Advisor Education, saying that in terms of the transition back to school, to make sure we don't lose this innovation and ownership of their learning that many of our rangatahi have actually demonstrated and illustrated for us. And so, those are those sorts of elements that I think are really significant. But if I go back to the sort of the area that's really sits very deeply with me, is that this is this really opportunity for us to look as a nation much more broadly around the types of opportunities that they are. And again, I've learned something from Tahu a long time ago, that you know, the incredible gift that we have, the taonga that we have a young age profile amongst our Māori and Pacific. In a largely aging population across many nations that are aging, what a wonderful gift that we have in having our young Māori and Pacific people, you know, having that young age profile amongst our Māori and Pacific communities. And so it's ensuring there that the investment is right to move forward. And, you know, again, sort of thinking about what that means in terms of addressing the child poverty types of indicators, what it means to ensure that whānau are supported so that our children can truly flourish and then make that contribution and participation back. So it's all of those elements to not lose an opportunity. I have one of my young women who's just an amazing poet, who's spent a lot of her young life, far too young life, in prison. And she's an amazing poet. And one of her poems sort of starts with, you know, maybe chances were never chanced and life never breathed me. And I think, you know, particularly when I sort of think about how we start, you know, the declamation of Tihe Mauri Ora, what it means for a young wahine Māori to say, you know, that maybe chances were never chanced and life never breathed me. And I think that we just cannot squander the opportunities that we have to create real differences and to support people to be transformative agents of change within their own communities, and for young children, for very young children, to realize that they can be change makers, that the way that the world is, much of it is socially constructed, it can be both made and unmade. And so I think that that's a really powerful message that our young people have brought to my attention once again.
I was going to ask another question, but I feel like that's the perfect way for us to probably conclude our conversation, because Tracy and Tahu, for me, the big challenge that you've just extended is for us to remember that our response can be a response that's unique to Aotearoa, that we cannot lose the opportunity that we have, that we must not just survive but thrive, and that what will make us either succeed or fail will be the degree to which we involve everyone, particularly our rangatahi, in our response. So thank you both for the reminder of that, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us today, and particularly reminding us of the importance of a Te Ao Māori response too.
Kia ora. Ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi. Thank you both, and please join us again for another Conversations Through COVID-19. Our next conversation will be someone from our arts and cultural community, so I look forward to speaking with you all again soon.